God has loved the Israelites and has blessed them over and over and over again. He's brought them out of Egyptian bondage. He has provided for them. He has protected them. And when they have been disobedient, He has provided a way for them to come back into a relationship with Him. And yet, still, over and over and over again, they are disobedient to the Lord, even through all that He's done for them. And so, as prophesied, He allows them to go off into Assyrian and Babylonian captivity. He still loves them, but once again, He's drawn a line in the sand. And so they are off into captivity. And the first deportation takes place about 605 BC. Now, over the next 60 or 70 years, a new kingdom will rise to power, and that's the kingdom of Persia. And they have a little bit different philosophy as far as their captives are concerned. You know, the Assyrians and Babylonians, they were very hard on their captives and really restricted them as far as what they were able to do. But the Persians are different. Their philosophy was, listen, if we give these people a little latitude, you know, help them to become a little bit more complacent about where they are, then there's much less likelihood that they'll rebel. And we won't have nearly as much trouble if we will do that. And so that's their philosophy. That's their stance, and that's the position that they move toward. And so 66 years later, around 66 years later, I don't know if it was to the day or not, but 66 years later, the king of Persia issues a decree. And basically what he says is, I'm going to give all the Israelites permission under my authority to return to their homeland and to rebuild the temple and to resettle and repopulate and rebuild their city and to rebuild the wall. And so, can't you imagine that the Israelites would be thinking, hallelujah, finally we get to go back home and, you know, rebuild and resettle, you know, where the promised land was, and yet that's not the response. That's not the response. Because you see, what has happened in the meantime is that these Israelites over time have become pretty well ingrained where they are in captivity. I mean, they've built houses, they've started careers, they've bought land and prepared the land for crops and intermarried with the people, shame on them, intermarried with the people of that time. And so, see, they're pretty well ingrained. And so, even though you might think that this would be a happy occasion, it's not necessarily a happy occasion, because what's going to be required of them is that they pick up their roots. They leave everything behind that they have built in captivity and go back to Jerusalem. Well, so it didn't happen immediately, but 4 years later, 42,000 Israelites decide, okay, we're going to make the sacrifice. We're going to go back and we're going to rebuild. We're going to resettle Jerusalem. And so they go back. When they go back, what they find is something not exactly like they wanted to, because a lot of the nations around that area don't want the Israelites back there. They don't want the Israelites coming back into power. They don't want the God of the Israelites especially blessing them as they resettle this land, as they rebuild their city. And so there's a lot of conflict there. There are a lot of things going on there. And so they've got this outside conflict coming in from the nations around them. But not only that, there's another problem. And that is, you know, yes, we know we're supposed to rebuild the temple. Yes, we know we're supposed to rebuild the city. Yes, we know we're supposed to rebuild the wall, but we have no place to live. I mean, you know, we have no land, we have no career, so on and so forth. And so what they do is the same thing that they did in Persia. They start, instead of focusing on God's work, they focus upon resettling themselves, about building houses, about acclimating themselves to that area. And so 14 years passes. 14 years pass. Okay. 14 years passed, and really not much has been done on the work of the temple. The foundation has been laid, but after that, it's pretty much been idle. So 14 years later, a new king of Persia arises, and his name is not Cyrus, but it is Darius. And we won't go through all the details about how he became king, but all of a sudden he became king, and now at the urging of Haggai and Zechariah, he is going to reissue, if you will, the decree that Cyrus did and said, listen, Israelites, you have my permission to go ahead and start building the temple, to go ahead and start building the city, and he lets all the nations around there know about it as well. In other words, leave these guys alone. Leave these guys alone. Let them rebuild. They are doing so under my authority. And so, a couple of years later, at the urging of Haggai and Zechariah, work begins on the temple again. And 2 years later, the temple is finished. Okay? And so now the ongoing resettlement and reconstruction and rebuilding of the city and the wall is going on. And so for the next 58 years, we're going to fast forward. 58 years in the future. And then under a new king, a Persian king by the name of Artaxerxes, all right, we have a teacher of the law by the name of Ezra, who returns with the authority of King Artaxerxes and starts helping to rebuild the city. He takes 1,500 Israelites back with him. Now, in order to get to our main character today, 14 years later, a man by the name of Nehemiah comes into the picture. And that's where we're going to be today. We're going to talk about Nehemiah. And we're going to talk about the leadership, some of the leadership qualities that we see as far as this man Nehemiah is concerned. Nehemiah is an Israelite, and he has been a part of the captivity. As a matter of fact, he is under the rule of Artaxerxes, and he is not just under his rule, but he has a very special relationship with Artaxerxes. He is Artaxerxes' cupbearer. And if you don't know what that is, he's the guy that tastes all the food and all the drink before it's actually given to Artaxerxes, so that if there was any poison in that, he might feel the effects of it before Artaxerxes does. And so, really, he has a very strong relationship, a very close relationship with Artaxerxes. And Artaxerxes has put his trust in this man. And so, he is in a very unique position as far as that's concerned. I don't know exactly how the hand of the Lord always works, but I want to believe that somehow, some way, He has positioned Nehemiah in this space for this particular time. And so I think this is providential. And so what I want to see is, I want us to see a few things about Nehemiah in regards to how he responds to what's going on regarding the resettlement and the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem and the wall itself. He receives word that there is really nothing being done as far as the reconstruction of the wall is concerned. And he's upset about that. He's saddened about that. And so what I want to say, the first thing I want to see about Nehemiah today is that he is not a man who says whatever. He doesn't do that. And Charles and I have a little bit of an inside joke about that particular word, but I'm not going to go into that. But he doesn't look at those things and just say, well, that's just the way it is. There's nothing I can do about that. He has not become so calloused and indifferent to the things that are going on in his world that he's not upset by the fact that the wall is not being built. Listen to what the writer says in Nehemiah, beginning in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. And we've already talked about this. We know what's going on there. And he says, the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And so what I want to say is, once again, Nehemiah had probably every reason, every legitimate reason to just say, who am I? I'm just a cupbearer. I'm a nobody. I don't have really any position of authority. I really don't have the means by which I can, attempt to take care of this problem. He could have said that. And he could have said, I look back over the history of the Israelites, and haven't they always been stubborn and obstinate? And isn't this the way things have gone on for centuries? And so he could have just said, just the way it is, whatever. But he didn't do that. He was saddened by the fact that even though he knew what the work of the Israelites was, it was not being done. And he knew for a fact that God could not have been pleased about that. Guys, I think about us today. We live in a world that does not know our God. Not only, and certainly do they not know Him, but they don't obey Him. And as Christians, what we understand is that His Word is our ultimate authority. He's the one that says, do, and we do. He's the one that says, jump, and we say, how high. And so that Word is our ultimate authority, and we always rely upon that, but our world does not live in that kind of world. They live in a world that says, listen, it's all about me, myself, and I. And when you take that kind of approach, you have certain things that says, listen, I've got these urges to involve in a sexual lifestyle that is becoming more and more acceptable all the time. Okay? And the thing about it is it's for me. It's for my benefit, really. But what I want to do is, so that I might benefit more from it, I want to spread the word that this is an acceptable alternative lifestyle. And you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. But going back to the authority of God's Word, as Christians, we know that that is not acceptable to God. And it must not be acceptable to us either. And so I hope that we will never get to the point to where we see things like this going on in our world, and we just say, whatever, that's the way it is, and it's going to just get worse more and more and more as time goes on. Now, I'm not saying that we be offensive or be militant or anything like that, but when given the opportunity, I want us to be saddened by the fact that these things are going on in our world. I think about the pro-choice issue today, and I think, is that God's will? Is that what He would have for us as Christians? Now, once again, if you were to look at the entire world, they would give you a different answer. But their authority is not this. They have a different authority. They respond to a different authority. They answer to a different authority, and basically, it's themselves. It's whatever I want, as long as I don't hurt anybody else, and I don't know how you can have an abortion and not hurt someone else, but you know what I'm saying. As long as I don't step on anybody else's toes, that's my business. So essentially, I become my own God. I hope that you're saddened every time you hear about that. And that given the opportunity, that you would speak up in a loving and kind manner and yet say that is not what the God of the Bible accepts. He does not approve that. And so, once again, if you answer to His authority, then that saddens you, like it did Nehemiah when the work of the Lord was not being done. So, Nehemiah had not become a man that would just say, whatever, and leave it alone. He was saddened about that, but not only was he that, but he put his trust in God. And I look at these things about us today, and I'm going to come back to that. Got ahead of myself. All right. Nehemiah put his trust in God. Listen to what he says in verses 5 through 11. O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God. Now this is when he was still cupbearer under King Artaxerxes, and he says, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servant, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. And that's exactly what he had done. But if you return to me and obey my commands, and even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today, because what's he going to do? He's going to talk to the king. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And so he knew that he was going to have to obtain permission under the authority of Artaxerxes to do anything about this. And he knew that on his own, maybe he could win the favor of Artaxerxes because they had such a close relationship. But he knew for a fact that if God got involved in it, that it would happen. It would happen. He did not trust just himself, but he trusted God as well. And I think about us. I think about the things that lie ahead of us, and we don't know what those are. But I know that there will be challenges. I know that there will be obstacles. I know that a lot of times we'll find ourselves in situations like this to say, Lord, I just can't handle this. I can't handle this on my own. I think about David. What a great example of someone who trusted in the Lord. He knew that by himself he couldn't kill the lion or the bear, but he knew with God's help that would be taken care of. Same way with Goliath. He knew that it wasn't by his own power, but it was by God's deliverance that he would be able to defeat Goliath. And so what I want to say is when we encounter walls in our ministry, challenges, giants that are bigger than we are, we cannot forget, like the Israelites had forgotten whenever Goliath stood before them, that God is on our side. And there's nobody bigger than God. And there's nobody more powerful than God. And God listens to us. And He will provide a positive answer to what we're asking. And so once again, Nehemiah was a man who trusted God. But not only that, but Nehemiah was not someone who just sat around and prayed, which there's nothing wrong with that. But he went a little further. Nehemiah was a man of action. I remember Richard Rogers saying a long time ago, sometimes it's time to get up off our knees and get to work. We prayed long enough, now let's get busy. Let's let the Lord work through us in accomplishing His will. And so Nehemiah was a man of action. Listen to chapter 2, verse 1. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad? See, there's the boldness that comes from trust in the Lord. He had the boldness to say something to the king. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. See, once again, these nations that are surrounding the Jerusalem are still trying to prevent the Israelites from resettling. And so he says, give me letters, with your signature, with your authority, telling these guys to step back and until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall and for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, see what he just did? He gave credit to God. He didn't take credit himself, but he realized that God's hand was in this. The king granted my request. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. And so even though Nehemiah was perhaps a nobody, perhaps not very powerful, perhaps didn't have a lot of authority, he trusted in God. And he prayed to God, and then he took action. He took that first step. He said, let me go back. Let me be a part of this rebuilding. The city where my forefathers were, it lies in ruins. The gates are burned. Let me go. Why shouldn't I be sad? Let me go back. And so once again, God working in that relationship, Artaxerxes gave him permission. Let's not be a people that just sit around and pray and wait for the Lord to act. Let's get up off our knees and let's wait for the answer of the Lord as He works through us. Could He do it by Himself? Of course He could. But He's chosen to use us in order to accomplish His will. So let's get off our knees and get busy taking the first steps as far as what the Lord wants us to do. Nehemiah, number 4, Nehemiah was also a man of encouragement. He was a man of encouragement. Listen to verses 11 through 18. He says, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well, and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then he said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Of course they did. Of course they realized that. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. And surely, the fact that God had answered his prayer in regards to permission from the king had swayed these guys. Evidently, they saw the hand of God in this, and it wasn't just Nehemiah, but it was God that was bringing this back. And this wasn't the first time. They knew this already. And so what I want to say is that he was a man of encouragement. Listen, I don't know about you, but I don't like, although sometimes it's necessary, I don't like sermons or lessons that lay a guilt trip on me. I mean, who does? Anybody like that? No. But what I want to say is that so many times we lay guilt trip upon people, and especially our own brethren, in order to get them to act. And what I want to say is, man, just a few words of encouragement would be so much better. Let's look on the positive side. Let's look at this and say, let me tell you something about this church. This church this year reached out to this many people with the gospel here in Lubbock. You know, I bet we don't even have a clue how many that is. And maybe we couldn't. But what I want to say is, how encouraging would that be? I know for a fact that Sunset is a church who is very evangelistic. And they do lots and lots of things and are involved in lots and lots of activities in reaching out to the lost of Lubbock. And so at the end of the year, what I want to hear is, we gave 197,000 people the opportunity to hear the gospel. Man, how encouraging would that be? So that's where I'm going. And what I want to say is, always be a person who is an encourager. So, remember this. Be like Nehemiah. Don't become a person who says whatever. Always put your trust in God. Always be a man of action. Be a person of encouragement as well. And so what I want to say to you today in closing is, go and be more like Nehemiah. Thank you.